To be attainted as a traitor. Written and read by Neria. Summary. There is a world where a prince followed a king's command, leading to tragedy. This is not that world. King Viserys commanded him to return the egg, send his whore away, and return to his lawful wife, or else be attainted as a traitor. So says Fire and Blood. Attainder, according to Merriam-Webster, means extinction of the civil rights and capacities of a person upon sentence of death or outlawry, usually after a conviction of treason. Chapter 1. Daemon. He had raged too high, too drunk on the news of the babe in Mysaria's belly quickening, too ignorant of the world beyond Dragonstone, beyond the little haven they had created for themselves. He had given Mysaria a dragon egg for their babe to celebrate the news and had awoken his brother's wrath. A force had been dispatched to Dragonstone to collect the egg and to deliver the king's decree, and he could not help but obey. For what else was there to do? He had little doubt that should Daemon be attainted, Mysaria with their babe would follow him in death shortly. If Viserys saw fit to execute his brother for this, surely he would not spare his brother's whore, as he named her. He could fight. He supposed that he could fight his way out, but to do so would be to risk the life of Mysaria and the babe, surrounded as they were by his brother's men. He had little doubt that he would emerge victorious at the end, whatever the odds, whatever the injury, but he could not risk her. He could not risk them. And so, Daemon had returned the egg. He had returned the egg and he had let them take Mysaria from him. He watched in impotent rage as they seized her, wrapping meaty hands around her pale arms, doubtless bruising her so delicate skin. The skin he had so delighted in marking as his, with marks softly sucked onto her breasts and her swelling belly and the inside of her thighs. His breath was stolen by shock when, as he watched, her eyes turned to him in shocked betrayal and hurt when the destination to which she was being banished was revealed. Liz. Fucking Liz. Were there no bounds to his brother's cruelty? To choose Liz, where Mysaria had been born into slavery, had been trained and suffered and toiled, was beyond cruel. And it was yet another way in which Daemon would fail her. When he had bought her out of her servitude from the brothel he had found her in, he had sworn to her she would never have to return to the work she had done if she did not wish it. Now she was being sent to the place where her very life could be in danger if they believed her an escaped slave, and where she would have little choice but to return to her previous profession. Little choice, or no choice at all if they made her a slave again. And that was yet another cruelty of his brother. Was it not enough that he had returned the egg? Was it not enough that he would never see his child be born? Never see it? In Liz, his child was like as not to be born a slave, and should it escape that fate, be made a slave. Was his own banishment to the vale to his hateful wife not enough? But it was too late now. Too late for action now that they had their filthy paws on Mysaria leading her away. Too late for regret. If the risk of her being harmed had stayed his hand before, there would be surety of it now. He followed them all the way to the docks, just a few paces behind them, hand wrapped around the Dark Sister's pommel in a silent and fruitless warning. They knew him powerless to stop them now. They knew him a fucking craven now, a slave to his brother's will. Seething quietly, he watched as they jostled her onto the trading cock and left her there. There was little need for them to stay with her as the plank was retracted, the ship made to cast away immediately by the order of the king. He stayed there and watched the ship go. Watched as it left the docks and extended its sails, and then watched and watched until the ship disappeared from his sight, until his eyes burned. All that was left to him now was to leave for the Vale, to return to his wife. All that remained to him now was endless misery. By his brother's order. He had returned the egg and let them send Mysaria away, and still he would be put to death, a traitor, should he remain here and not go to the fucking runestone. It was even tempting. He would never get to see a child of his be born either way, and this way he would never have to see Rhea either. Even as he returned to his chambers to collect his things, to pack, never to return to the beloved home of his ancestors, he wondered still. As he reached for his armor to wrap it in cloth to be safely transported, he froze. Was it even worth it? His brother would never see a value in him. His brother would never grant him an annulment, and now it was apparent that his brother would never allow him even a child of his own. What worth was his life living like this, living a prisoner to his brother's will and whim? Daemon was a fucking dragon rider. He might not be a king, but he had a dragon. He could go wherever the fuck he wanted. He could live wherever the fuck he wanted, and his fucking brother could do little to him once he was beyond the reach of his rule. Viserys was no Jaehaerys, and even Jaehaerys' writ had its limits. Making a decision, he finished his packing and called for servants to take his bags away to be loaded onto caraxes by the dragon keepers, and then he called for a servant to assist him into his armor. Daemon departed from Dragonstone and headed north in the direction of the Whale, before rising above clouds and changing direction completely. Viserys placed no men on the ship to guard Mysaria once she was aboard, and he had little doubt sailors would be intimidated into surrendering her easily enough, whatever coin they had been paid for her passage. The ship's sails were burned into his memory, and so, when he was sure he could not be sighted from Dragonstone or any of the ships belonging to it, he descended below the clouds, and then lower still to let his eyes roam and search for vessels sailing in the same direction the trading cog would, urging caraxes to search as well. When his faithful mount let out a trill and changed his heading slightly, he was beyond grateful, for when he could see the sails at last, it was indeed the right ship. There were cries of alarm from the crew as it circled the ship, caraxes spewing flames in its path, though not too close. "Lower your sails, now!" Daemon waited and circled somewhat impatiently while the sails were lowered and the ship started to slow, and then bade the bloodworm to lightly touch down on the stern so he could unfasten his chains and jump down on the deck without caraxes allowing his full weight down. Once he faced the gathered sailors, quite stunned by the recent developments, he could see Mysaria behind them, staring at him in disbelief. He addressed them all with a smile. "My good men, I must apologize for the confusion, but the lady belongs with me. I would be most grateful were you to hand her over without any unpleasantness. The words seemed to wake Mysaria from her stupor, and she started to make her way through the men, still staring, still unmoving, still silent. When she came to him, her face was wet with tears. "My prince?" He inclined his head a fraction, his gaze never wavering from the sailors, watching for any mischief. "My lady, it occurred to me you might be in need of an alternative transportation and alternative destination." Even with his gaze fixed as it was, he could see a smile appearing on her face. "Indeed I am, my prince. Where to?" "That depends." "On what?" Daemon had thought about it. He was already a traitor to his brother, already a man that could never return to Westeros without putting his life at stake. But with his and Mysaria's departure in opposite directions confirmed, and his arrival at Runestone likely not awaited at all, he might still have time. His marriage to Rhea Royce would never be set aside. Never. But he could still take a second wife in the Valyrian tradition. To do so without the king's approval would be a crime. A crime worth an exile. But what was an exile to him when he was a traitor already? Had his brother not reacted so to his gifting Mysaria the egg? His babe would be born a bastard. Now, despite all the ill that came from it, if Mysaria were to agree. Daemon lowered his voice so no one but Mysaria would hear him speak. "Understand that whatever choice you make, I will see you safe and well situated. I will not abandon you or the babe." Mysaria's eyes turned wary as he spoke, and he finally turned his head to look directly into them. "If you agree to become my second wife, we will fly to Driftmark first, to be wed in the tradition of my ancestors, to bind our blood together. After, we would fly to Pentos. If you do not agree to the marriage, we will fly to Pentos directly." She was staring at him, a hand now covering her mouth. You are a prince. I am a whore. Nothing but a whore." There were fresh tears in her eyes. "Ay, I would, if you would. And you have not been a whore for some time now." Tears rolled down her wet cheeks. "I would. I will." "Very well then, Driftmark it is." It took some doing to mount Caraxes again with the stability of the ship as disturbed by his presence as it was, and with Mysaria not dressed for a flight at all. It took some doing, but they managed it, and they took wing once more, the rescue a success. He did not bother hiding his arrival at Driftmark, landing by high tide and announcing himself, requesting a word with his cousin. The word of his brother's decree was unlikely to reach them yet, as the force was sent directly to Dragonstone without even the order arriving by Raven beforehand, likely to avoid alerting him and giving him a chance of escape. They were directed into a cellar, and he seated Mysaria into a comfortable chair, preferring pacing himself, waiting for his cousin most impatiently. Surely she would help. Surely, after the insult his brother issued her husband and her, surely she would help him. When the door to the cellar finally opened, he turned to it sharply, and Mysaria jumped out of her seat into a low curtsy. "Cousin, your arrival here is most unexpected." Rhaenys' gaze drifted towards Miss Arya and her brow lifted. Especially with company. Cousin, I wish I were here under better circumstances. Alas, I am here to ask you a favor. Miss Arya finally straightened from her curtsy, her eyes remaining fixed to the ground, shoulders pulled forward and her hands held in front of her. Rhaenys' brows rose further as she did so, and the swell of her belly became apparent. Oh, our felicitations in order, dear cousin. I was unaware. Daemon's lips twisted in a rictus of a smile. Ay, cousin. Doubly so. Miss Arya and I are to wed. I am here to ask you to perform the blood-binding ceremony. His cousin took a sharp, startled breath and turned her wide eyes from where they were closely examining his companion to him. But you are wed already. Viserys will never allow this. You will be exiled for sure. Pressing his lips together tightly, he ground out. Exile is the least of my worries, cousin. Viserys wishes to name me a traitor regardless. I would at least be a traitor wed to the mother of my child. What? Viserys would never. Daemon grimly disagreed. He would, and he did. I made the mistake of giving Miss Arya a dragon egg for the babe, and when my brother heard of it, he had ordered me to give the egg back, send my whore away, and return to my fucking wife in the Vale or be attainted as a traitor. I did return the egg, but as you can see for yourself, that was as far as I was willing to go. Rhaenys brought a hand to her heart and closed her eyes in pain. Oh gods, what happened to this family? Be happy to be rid of it. I certainly will be. Daemon. He shook his head sharply. No, if keeping the mother of my child, by my side makes me a traitor to my brother, then traitor I will be. But I have no brother after today. None. Rhaenys let out a long breath, suddenly appearing very tired. Very well. I shall marry you too, if that is truly your wish. It is, and I want as many noble witnesses as can be gotten in such a short time. We need to be wed tonight and on our way in the morn. His eyes drifted to Miss Arya. Cousin, would you also arrange for some clothes for my lady? She was forced to travel with only the clothes on her back. Rhaenys sighed sadly again. I will. It seems to me that there is more to the story than what you have said so far. Daemon smiled at her gratefully. There is, but I am scarce in the mood to speak of it. Miss Arya remained silent and withdrawn throughout the conversation, and when his cousin finally addressed her directly, she startled badly. My lady, if you would follow me, I believe you would much appreciate a bath and some refreshments before the ceremony. Miss Arya offered her a hesitant smile as her eyes quickly darted upwards. It would be much appreciated indeed, princess. Rhaenys pinned him with a stern stare as she turned to lead her away. I will send a servant to show you a chamber as well. Armor is scarcely the best attire for a wedding, I would think. He nodded at her grimly. Hey, one would think so. There was so much to do, so much to plan, and Daemon's mind would not settle, not for even a moment, not even as his armor was removed from him, not even as refreshments were brought to him, not even as he settled into a bath himself. It was a fucking disaster. He had some gold set aside with the Iron Bank of Bravos that was his own, not bound to him being a member of House Targaryen. It would afford him a comfortable life were he on his own, but with Miss Arya and the babe soon enough, he would need more. He might have to carve out a place for himself, for them all, and he had little idea on how to go about it at present. He could hardly be content with living his life out comfortably, leaving nothing for the babe after he was gone. Or babes. There might be others after this one, after all. The thought left him stumped for a long while. He had not thought of it before. By wedding Miss Arya, he would not only give legitimacy to this babe, he would open a way for more. That was, if she agreed. But she had agreed to this one. Had agreed to it even before the security a marriage would offer was ever in her future. Surely she would not be opposed to more. He shook his head decisively and rose out of the cooling water. No, there was a babe now. Little good would come out of casting his gaze and his hopes too far into the future. He had been disappointed too often in his life. One babe would be enough. Daemon dressed himself in the red and black of his house slowly, with great care. Was he even worthy of bearing the colors now that he was a traitor? He startled badly when there was a knock at the door, lost in his thoughts as he was. "What is it?" "This Corlys. May I come in?" Relaxing his stance somewhat, he called him in and even managed a smile in welcome. "Lord Corlys, to whatever do I owe the pleasure of your company? I did not expect to see you before the ceremony." Corlys Velaryon smiled at him as well. "Do you mind if we sit? I believe there is much to be discussed between the two of us." Daemon's brows rose, but he inclined his head and gestured toward the seats in front of the hearth, joining the Lord of the Tides there as well. "My felicitations on your upcoming nuptials and other blessings." Daemon inclined his head once more, wary. "Thank you, my lord." The sea snake's mouth twitched, and he continued. "It would seem that your brother is a great disappointment to both of us. Some more than others, of course." When Daemon remained silent, even with more than enough time for a response, Sea Snake pressed on. "While I believe you have heard of the king's insult to me and my daughter, you likely know little of the cause the offer was made in the first place." Daemon's brows rose at that, and an amused smile came to his lips. "The reason for the offer, my lord? I would think that one to be obvious." There was no amusement in the lord's face, only anger. "It is not. 'Tis the stepstones." "Stepstones? What do the stepstones have to do with anything?" The face of Corlys Velaryon became grim. "Aye, the stepstones. The Triarchy is sinking my ships, stealing the cargo and killing my crews. Sometimes outright, sometimes after requesting truly astounding ransom. Sometimes they sink the ships regardless of the ransom paid. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes paying the toll is enough for the ship to pass in peace, but that is true for my ships less and less." Daemon frowned as he listened to the Lord of the Tides speak. "I asked the king to intervene, for it is mostly Westerosi ships, those owned by the houses of the narrow sea, that are treated most harshly. The marriage to my daughter was offered, so there would be a closer bond between us, a greater reason for the king to follow my advice." His face grim, jaw clenched, he gritted out the last words. "But that was not to be. And now I stand alone." "I see." Daemon's voice was cautious, for he did not, in fact, see anything. Lord Corlys pinned him with an intense stare. "I stand alone, and now so do you. Mayhaps we could be of service to each other. Well, he was certainly starting to see now. You wish me to help you? Help with what? I am sending a fleet to the Stepstones to root out the triarchy. Without the support of the king, there will be little support from other houses. Certainly no more ships to be had. It will be a long and bloody war, but it could be made shorter and less costly on our side if we were to have a dragon rider on our side. Daemon's brows were drawn together in a frown. You do realize that my soon-to-be wife is about to bear me a child soon, do you not? You would have me go to war at such a time? The sea snake gave him a wry smile. Ay, I would, for a child will be born with or without you there. Once this war is won, the Stepstones need to be held by someone who I can trust, and who can hold them on his own, of course. The offer was tempting, very tempting. It would certainly address the concerns he had expressed to himself only a short while ago. But that would be in the long term. In the short term, it would mean leaving Mysaria alone in a foreign place, among foreign people, without a true way to secure her and the babe against Viserys and any men he might send after them. He could take her with him, he supposed. But that would mean dragging her into a war zone. It seemed hardly fair to her. I will think about it. You will have my answer before we depart. You have my word on that. That is all I ask for, my prince. The Lord of the Tides left with a smile on his lips, doubtless already aware what his answer would be. There was little else left to him. As the night descended and stars came out, he could barely contain his excitement. This was it. He had dreamed of a Valyrian wedding as a boy, had dreamed of a Valyrian beauty he would wed and that would give him babes of his own. He had dreamed of a family of his own to love and to love him in turn. That dream died with his rushed betrothal to Royce, and then even the last hope of it once his brother refused all arguments, all petitions for an annulment. Now here he was, about to be wed in the tradition of his house twice over, not only binding his blood to a woman, but taking her as a second wife as well. Mysaria was mayhaps not the woman he would have thought to choose, but she was his, and she carried his babe, and that was all that mattered. They would do well together. They had done well enough together already. He waited for Mysaria at the stone altar, dressed in ceremonial robes, blinking when he finally sighted her, dressed in ceremonial robes as well, the headdress affixed to her head. She did look a proper Valyrian bride like this, pure and innocent as any maiden, the swell of her belly hidden in the voluminous robes. His throat was tight as she came to a stop facing him, in front of Rhaenys. They stood facing each other as his cousin handed him a dragon glass blade to make a first cut. They traded the blade, passing it from one to the other as they made their cuts. A cut to her lip, a cut to his, a cut across her palm, a cut across his, a sigil for fire on her forehead, a sigil for blood on his. Daemon watched Mysaria's even face as the ribbon was bound over their joined hands, and they bled into the cup. His wife, finally, a measure of freedom, after all this time. Blood of two joined as one, ghostly flame and song of shadows. Two hearts as embers forged in 14 fires, a future promised in glass. The stars stand witness, the vow spoken through time of darkness and light. They drank of their joined blood as Rhaenys recited the words, And when she finished, they sealed their vows with a less than decent kiss. Daemon made sure of it. Finally, at long last, he was free of Rhea and free to make his own future. A traitor. All it took was for him to become a traitor. Thank you all for listening. This was Neria. See you in chapter 2. Bye.